Hi guys, it's Mark Zickery, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zickery of Space Command. And if you haven't seen Space Command, go to the landing page of Mr. Sci-Fi and you can see 2 full hours, the first 2 full hours of the show, starring Doug Jones, Robert Picardo, Mira Furlan, Bill Mummy, Bruce Boxleitner, Ethan McDowell, and on and on. And we are currently shooting hour 6 of the show, of the 12-hour season. We're editing it now, what we shot a few weeks back, and it's coming together great. We can't wait to share it with you soon. And we're finishing the 2 creatures, the 2 8-foot-tall creatures that will be featured in it. It's just a dream come true. Every day is Christmas. And many of you know that we recently had a Kickstarter campaign, and it was a month long, and we were successful. We won. So our target was $50,000, and between that and our investors stepping up, we came in just under $80,000. So we'll be utilizing that to continue finishing and filming and finishing Space Command, and working on the other projects we're up to, and doing all sorts of stuff. Many adventures to come. So watch this channel, subscribe, tell your friends. So that is the little thing to catch you guys up. It's been a little while since I've been posting because it's been busy. But and if anyone wants to see me, if you're watching this when I've posted it, I'll be at WonderCon tomorrow, Saturday, in Anaheim. There's a panel on the Twilight Zone, and I'll be talking about that. A week ago, I was at the Hammer Museum in Westwood at a screening of 2 Outer Limits episodes, the original Outer Limits, the good one, the UCLA TV archive put on. And my friend Dave Scow, author of the Outer Limits Companion, and I were there to opine about the Twilight Zone. It was, the Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, their interrelation. So, but what I was going to talk about today is many of you know that I collect books. Look behind me. I'm a big fan of 1950s science fiction, as you know. And so there's this book show. Now, I go to antiquarian book shows, and I haunt used bookshops and all of that stuff. But there was a book show that I'd been told about for years and had never attended. And finally, a few years ago, I was invited to sign there. So I went, and I found out that it was absolutely terrific. So this is the Paperback Collectors Show in Glendale, at the Glendale Civic Auditorium. And I went there, Elaine and I went a few days ago, and it was super fun. Because one of the fun things about collecting paperback books is, first of all, the cover art can be absolutely brilliant and wonderful, very eye-catching, because back particularly in the 50s through the 60s, if you were a science fiction writer, the hardcover was to get reviews. Paperbacks didn't generally get reviews, and the paperback was to sell the most copies because they were cheaper and would sell a lot more copies. So the royalties came from the paperback sales, but the hardcover was to get the reviews and spread the word. And so, so as a result of that, the hardcovers, often the covers were fairly boring or not elaborate. You know, they weren't trying to snare the eye of the customer in the bookstore, whereas the paperback, those could be on a rack in a drugstore or at all sorts of places being sold, and they needed to catch the eye because they were smaller. And so these covers had wonderful artwork, bright colors, eye-catching images. And so I love those covers from the 50s. And also at a paperback show, the prices of the paperbacks, the collectible paperbacks, are usually much lower than the copies of hardcovers for obvious reasons. Now, the downside is that if it's an old paperback, if you read it, generally it falls apart. So sometimes you may have to get a reading copy to read the book or reread the book, and a collector's copy just for the cover, for the art of the object. So that's the prelude. Now, so I went there, and it was so fun. So I'm going to share with you some of the wonderful, wonderful things that I was able to acquire, and we'll talk about this. The book dealers are great people, wonderful people. You can often bargain with them a bit, get the price down a little bit, and they get to know you over years, because I've gone for several times now. So, and sometimes, in my mind, I have sort of a checklist of things that I want to eventually get. And one thing I found that wasn't science fiction, but I'd always wanted one of these. One of my favorite poems is Howl, the very famous poem by the Beat poet Allen Ginsberg, written in the 50s. And this is a signed copy of that book. And it's signed by Ginsberg, and he is no longer with us. And I was able to get this for a very good price. And I always put stickers that say signed by the author when it's signed by the author. And so that was just a great thing to find going there. Now, also, this is a book I'd seen before, hadn't gotten it until I found one that had where the price was right. This is again from the 50s, Behind the Flying Saucers. And this is such a great cover because they were trying to spice it up and have women in revealing, lingerie and so forth, and night clothes. So the idea was that everyone's rushed outside at night to see the flying saucers, which is there, and you can even see the guy in his pajamas. Really a wonderful piece of artwork, and I'd love to be part of that crowd. That looks like a lot of fun. So now also, these book dealers often do also carry hardcover books, and so sometimes you'll find something really, really cool for a really affordable price. This is one of the early books by Robert A. Heinlein, Beyond This Horizon. It was published by, there were several smaller publishers that just published science fiction and fantasy, and this is one of them, the Fantasy Press, 1948. This is a first edition, and it has some very kind of funky illustrations. The swimmer climbed out on the bank with effortless, graceful strength. And Heinlein at this point, 1948, was a fairly dashing-looking guy. And so here's this, and it was just like, a few bucks, not expensive. So I got that. I didn't have this in my collection until now. And then this is a very rare and very cool thing. Now, Thea von Harbu was married to Fritz Lang, the famous director, and she wrote the novel and the script of Metropolis, and also the book that accompanied it, the novel. And they also did another movie that was science fiction called The Girl in the Moon. And this is the American edition, first edition of that, the novel of that movie, The Rocket to the Moon. And Thea von Harbu, interestingly enough, so this book's, from the 20s. And I think actually this one was published in I think it listed 1930 as the publication date for the American edition, but it's a really good looking book, really cool. And Thea von Harbu, it was very interesting because many of my professors at UCLA, when I was a student there, I took a lot of film courses because the film building was right next to the art building, and I loved going to those classes. And many of those professors knew the great directors and writers and actors of the golden age of Hollywood, including Fritz Lang, who also was a friend of Forrest J. Ackerman's. And the story goes, Fritz Lang was one of the greatest directors ever, and he did these huge films in Germany. And when Hitler came to power in 1933, Fritz Lang had just completed a movie called M, which is one of the greatest movies ever made. In fact, when I interviewed John Brom, the director of Time Enough at Last, the classic Twilight Zone episode where Burgess Meredith is the last man on Earth, John Brom told me that, in his opinion, M was the greatest movie ever made. And there's a case to be made for that. Stars Peter Lorre. But so the Nazis come to power. Joseph Goebbels, who's head of propaganda, invites Fritz Lang into a meeting, and he says, I want you to be the head of the German film industry. And Fritz Lang says, well, I'm very honored, but one of my grandmothers was Jewish, so I'm 1/4 Jewish. And Goebbels said, we decide who's Jewish and who's not. And so Fritz Lang said, well, then I'll be very honored and very happy to fill that post. And he left, and he immediately got on a train and left the country and came to America. And good for him. And he was certainly right to do that. Didn't even pack a bag. And but the one thing he did want to take was his wife, Thea von Harbu. So he said to her, I'm going to America, I'm getting out of Germany, you want to come with me? And she said no. She was an ardent Nazi and decided to stay. And even after the war, there was the denazification process, and all she had to do was say that she wasn't a Nazi, didn't believe any of that, just was carried along by the terror of the times or whatever, and they would have given her a clean bill of health, and she could have gone and lived her life. But instead, she said, "No, I was a Nazi then. I am a Nazi now. I will not lie and not be true to my beliefs." And so they put her on a work gang, and but that was anyway. That story was told to me. So this again is Rocket to the Moon. And if you want to ever see that, you can certainly find it online and watch the movie. It's one of the early Rocket to the Moon movies, and and you could get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So there's that story. So then here's some more cool paperback covers from the 50s that I got at the Paperback show. Space Prison by Tom Godwin. Now, Tom Godwin is best known nowadays for the short story he wrote called the Cold Equations, which is about a girl who stows away on a spaceship, but because they are limited in terms of weight and won't reach their destination if they keep her on board and can't go back because they've expended too much fuel at that point, they basically have to eject her out of the spaceship. This was adapted into an episode on the new Twilight Zone. It's one of the most harrowing short stories ever, and was done as a great radio adaptation, I think, on X-1. But Tom Godwin wrote this novel as well, Space Prison, and it's pretty fun. It's got all the requisite things: a girl in scanty clothes, shapely girl, strong-looking guy in sort of a quasi-space suit, and rocket ship and guys with space guns and all that. So very cool. Here's another one. Now, this is by Ed Emshwiller, because he was painting all the ace doubles at that point, the wonderful Ed Emshwiller. This is a book by Brian Aldiss, who is a British writer. And this is the other flip side of it. It's a novel by another popular science fiction writer of the time, Kenneth Bulmer. And you can see that Ed Emshwiller is like trying out a design for a cool-looking robot. This is long before C-3PO. But again, I love the variety in what Emshwiller's doing. I love the color palette he uses. He often chooses very dramatic settings and perspectives for his covers, and they're just I just love them. I'm looking for an original painting by Emshwiller to have someday, but just really, really cool. Now also, and as I was saying, the prices can be very, very good. So for instance, this is a first edition paperback of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, one of the great classics of science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke later would write 2001: A Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick. He was one of the great writers of science fiction. It's got a wonderful Richard Powers cover, just very beautiful. And Richard Powers and Ed Emshwiller were the two great artists of science fiction covers of the 1950s. Kelly Freas also was one of the prominent ones, as was Jack Gauguin. He was more into the 60s. But this is great. This is $5. $5. A new paperback of this book would probably be more than $5. And it's in terrific condition, a real find. Here's another book that I found. I got this just for the cover. Panther Books, The Transposed Man. And it's just another very dramatic, eye-catching book. It's by Dwight V. Swain, whom I do not know. I believe Panther is a British publisher. So, but it's, again, a very cool cover. Guy with a ray gun, muscular guy in the foreground, spaceship flying around, all the cool things, and futuristic buildings, all that stuff. So there's another great book. Now, another thing they had for like $3 were books signed by the author. Now, one of the science fiction authors of that era was named George H. Smith. He's not well known now, but this is Doomsday Wing, and it's signed by the author, and it's in the beginning of the end. In the war room of Command Post D, the military and civilian analysts stared in horror as the message appeared on the big screen. Attention all commands. Samos Satellite 105 reports rocket fired from Eastern Siberian Point NORAD. So again, people were living under the threat of nuclear annihilation, and it was one of the great tropes of science fiction throughout the 50s, books about World War III. Both mainstream authors and science fiction authors were writing about that. So this is a very cool cover, very distinctive, and George Smith signed that himself. Here's another great apocalyptic novel, After the Rain, which has a flooded Statue of Liberty, great painting. It's by John Bowen, and it's published. There were several publishers who were the really great publishers of science fiction through that period. This is Ballantine Books, there's Signet, there's a number of them. And this is, the British are a hardy island people. At least two aspects of this country are world-renowned: the astonishing number of high-caliber writers they produce and their climate. After the Rain is an impressive combination of both. In fact, and that goes on, but it says if you like cataclysmic novels, John Bowen's After the Rain is as exciting as any deluge you can hope to find. But if you think deluges are too trivial, John Bowen has a surprise for you. His novel turns out to be satire of the first order. So there you go. So even though they're talking about England, the cover shows the Statue of Liberty. So now here's another book signed by the author, George H. Smith. The 4-Day Weekend, What Happens to a Man When a Woman is the Boss, Even in the 21st Century. I told Elaine that time, I ask myself that every day. And it's got another fun cover, got man and woman in spacesuits, just very cool, very well rendered, and signed by the author, $3. Here's some more. There's a lot of these, so, settle back with your cup of coffee. One of the artists who would do science fiction book covers, but was mainly known as a comic book artist, was Wally Wood. And I believe he did this cover. It looks very much like his style. Village of Stars, another World War III suspense novel. Could they disarm their deadly nuclear bomb before it destroyed them all and triggered World War III? Nerve-shattering suspense, says the Cleveland Press. There's that. Wally Wood was one of the great artists in Weird Science Comics, the EC Comic, Weird Science and Weird Science Fantasy, and so forth. And but again, this is a really fun and distinctive cover that would, I'm sure, sell a lot of books in its day. Now, slightly earlier is this fun paperback of Farewell, My Lovely by Raymond Chandler. Again, these were very inexpensive. This is a wonderful novel. It's been filmed twice that I know of, and been done as radio plays and all sorts of stuff. Really a wonderful piece of writing. Chandler's one of the great mystery writers. Bad blood flows freely, it says on the back. So there you go. And that's a character named Moose Malloy, I believe, pictured on the front. And so yeah, it's a really cool book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. Now, again, I was talking about Nuclear Armageddon. Philip Wiley co-wrote When Worlds Collide, the novel in the 30s. So here he is back in the 50s. They smuggled the atom bomb. So again, you can see nuclear fear is moving a lot of books. The fate of America is ticking away. Your friend Harry is above suspicion. You think he's an everyday Joe, likable, respectable, good at bridge, average with the women. He wouldn't hurt a fly, you think, yet in his room is a closet. On the closet door is a lock. You're a sucker for gadgets, and so just for a gag, you jimmy it. Inside is a box, heavy, lined with lead, and inside that is an atom bomb. Wow. Terrific. Look at that artwork. A guy, a gal, and an atom bomb, and a guy who's maybe dead on the bottom or just taking a nap. So here's another great piece of detective fiction. Dashiell Hammett, A Man Called Spade. This is the detective who, of course, is Humphrey Bogart played Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon. He also played Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler's detective, in the Big Sleep. And though this guy looks a little more like George Segal, if you know that actor from the 70s and 80s and so forth, but dramatic. And this is published by Dell Books, and during this period, they would always have a map of the location in the book, even if it didn't need that. But that was just what they did, so cool. And then we get to, let me see what other wonders we have here. Okay, here's, actually, I'll do this. Another cool thing was, this was sold to me as a package deal. One of the great science fiction novels is The Stars, My Destination. And if you look up there, that blue cover with the guy with the tattooed face, that's the British first edition under the title Tiger, Tiger, which is a quote from William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, etc., etc. So this is a later hardcover, but the reason this was included was because it was included with this, which is the deluxe graphic novel adaptation of The Stars, My Destination, which is the American title of this, and it's signed by the artist, Howard Chaykin, by the publisher, Byron Price, and by the author, Alfred Bester. So it's a signed first edition of the Stars, My Destination graphic novel. And, wow, you're not going to find that very often. And I knew Byron Price. He worked with my dear friend Michael Reeves, whom I will be talking about in the next Mr. Sci-Fi video, my dear friend Michael Reeves. So here's the first paperback edition of What Mad Universe by the great Frederick Brown. And he wrote mysteries and science fiction, and this is one of the science fiction novels. He was in a new world, a world of spaceships and interplanetary wars, a violent, hurtling world he was never meant to see, and one he longed to escape. Wow. Well worth your time. And then this is another one signed by the author. Frederick Pohl was an editor and a science fiction writer, and he also collaborated with C.M. Kornbluth, who died young. And so I met Frederick Pohl at a number of science fiction conventions. He was a really smart guy, really nice guy. And this is signed by him. And again, it's Wolfbane with a really very cool cover. Might be Richard Powers, hard to say, but In fact, I'm pretty sure it is Richard Powers from a lot of the stylistic things, and very, very neat. So then continuing on. So again, here's a couple more wonderful ace doubles that we were talking about. There's one, Threshold of Eternity, which has this creature ripping apart the fabric of space-time. Very dramatic, and that's by John Brunner, who later would win a Hugo for Stand on Zanzibar, a great novel about overpopulation. And I remember in Stand on Zanzibar, he has these characters called berserkers, which are people who go berserk for no reason and kill a number of people in one fell swoop. And now, of course, every single day here in America we have that. So it was prescient for its time. John Brunner was a British writer, very talented, and that was really the height of his writing career, Stand on Zanzibar. And interestingly enough, when I was at the World Science Fiction Convention in Glasgow many years ago, I was doing a presentation about Babylon 5, which I was writing at the time, and at the end of the talk, they came up to announce that John Brunner, the guest of honor at the convention, had just died. And so he died at that convention. But in his time, he wrote some wonderful things, and I'm sure this is a lot of fun to read. On the other side is a Poul Anderson book, The War of Two Worlds. This is almost certainly work by Ed Emshwiller, these two images, and or someone equally talented. But that's just, really, really fun. And here's another one, an Ed Emshwiller double. This is The Genetic General by Gordon R. Dixon, who was, again, popular in his day. And on the flip side is Time to Teleport, also by Gordon Dixon. Often what Ed Emshwiller would do is he'd have one side that was closer on people, featured one person in particular, and then on the other side it would be much more like a crowd scene or something with smaller elements. But he was probably painting these things at a frenetic pace. He would have to do a rough version to get approval for it, and then he would paint the final. And these are keepers. And let me see, got some more here. Okay, now another fun thing that they did. Often the book would be published in hardcover, but then the title might not be eye-catching enough to be in the paperback. So they retitle the book, and this is one such book. I don't remember what they told me the title of this book actually was, but when it's published, A.E. Van Vogt was one of the great writers of science fiction. He wrote Slan, which was a huge success, one of the key novels of science fiction. But this is one of his mystery titles, I think, and this is The Mating Cry. And it says at the top, quote, "I have come to pay my debt in the way I discovered men prefer." So there's a whole subgenre of bondage oriented covers, book covers, but often these books are lurid on the cover, but not in the book, and not nearly as, because of what they were allowed to write during the time, particularly in genre fiction. So this is pretty cool, great condition. I'd never seen this book before. That's another fun thing about all this stuff. You buy books throughout your entire life, decades, and you still find things from that same period that you've never seen before. Here's a lovely cover by Richard Powers. Normally Richard Powers would work in a very abstract form, but sometimes he would do something much more realistic and figurative. And so this is one of those. It's The Star of Life by Edmund Hamilton. Edmund Hamilton was, again a noted science fiction writer that I think probably started in the 20s and was working through the 60s. And this is just a beautiful portrait of a woman, great guy in a spacesuit. And again, look at the color. I mean, it's just eye-catching, bright green, purples. I mean, this is meant to catch your eye and get you to pick it up. The strange and terrifying adventure of the first man in orbit around the moon. So, and of course, this is before the moon landing, long before the moon landing, 1950s. And so, speculative fiction indeed. So then Frederick Pohl, who we just saw one of his books where he co-wrote with Cyril Kornbluth, C.M. Kornbluth. This is one of his original collections. Frederick Pohl, Turn Left at Thursday, again signed by Frederick Pohl. Just a wonderful little book, Ballantine Books, and just cool, super cool. Here's another book signed by its writer, Poul Anderson, one of the great writers of science fiction of the 50s and 60s and 70s. And again, lovely cover, signed book, $3. Pyramid was another one of the publishers of science fiction in that era. And let's see, getting down to almost the finals. Okay, so this is a science fiction collection A little bit earlier, this might be the 40s or very early 50s, The Girl with the Hungry Eyes, which is a short story by Fritz Leiber, who was, again, a Hugo-winning, very well-known science fiction writer. His father had been a very famous actor. That his father was Fritz Leiber Sr., this is Fritz Leiber Jr., and The Girl with the Hungry Eyes was adapted into a radio play that I heard. I think it was on X-1, I'm not sure, one of those shows. And it's a great title, of course, and again, eye-catching, no pun intended. Fritz Leiber Jr. was the science fiction writer. Fritz Leiber Sr. was the actor. They looked very similar. And you can see Fritz Leiber Sr. in movies like Monsieur Verdoux, the Chaplin film. He plays a priest in that who visits the convict before he's to be executed. So, but this is Tales of Femme Fatales. It says, The Girl with the Hungry Eyes and Other Stories, including Venus and the Seven Sexes. 6 brand new fantasy thrillers by a variety of noted science fiction writers. So, very fun. Now, this is now another genre of 1950s publishing was sort of juvenile delinquency. And, of course, Harlan Ellison, the great Harlan Ellison, wrote Memos from Purgatory, which was one of his great launchings into fame as a writer. But here's another book. Now this is Hal Elson, who is not Harlan Ellison, but this is Tomboy. Great cover art, but also it has an introduction by the noted psychiatrist Dr. Frederick Wortham. Now, if you don't know that name, in the 1950s, you had some of the greatest comic books ever done, particularly by EC Comics, Weird Science, Weird Fantasy, Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt. They were all shut down by Frederick Wortham, who wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocents, claiming that comic books were responsible for juvenile delinquency. And he actually had images from some of these comic books in his book. It was a very notorious book. There was congressional hearings. The comic book publishers were hauled in. It did not go well, and it led to the collapse of EC Comics. And the only title that EC Comics published that survived was Mad Magazine. They changed it from a comic book to a magazine to get past all of that. And but for a long time, saying that you wrote comic books was like saying you raped children. I mean, it was just, you did not say this. And Stan Lee felt very embarrassed in the early days saying what he did for a living, until finally in the 60s, Marvel Comics hit it big, and suddenly he became a genius rather than a loathsome, lowbrow character. But I thought this was great, and I've never seen anything else by Frederick Wortham other than Seduction of the Innocent, so I thought it'd be fun to read that. Found this copy of Amazing Stories, which is unusual in 2 ways. One, it serializes the first part of a Philip K. Dick novel. This is from 1969, called A Lincoln Simulacrum. I believe the novel ultimately was titled as The Simulacrum, so A Lincoln Simulacrum is an interesting alternate title. And unusual for science fiction of that era, it pictures a black man on the cover. And this is just as science fiction was starting to become more diverse. Samuel R. Delany and you had some other writers dealing with issues of race, and but it was very unusual in 1969 to see a black man on a cover. Science fiction fans were predominantly white, and so that's an interesting little thing. And then so one of the guys who had a table at the Paperback show said, well, I have a store on La Cienega Boulevard. Well, I hadn't known that, Sideshow Books. And he said, well, here's a card. And I'd never heard of this bookstore, but I thought I might as well check it out. And it's been there for 6 years, and I never saw it. Isn't that amazing? But I went there today, and I found a few very cool little books. So this is a British edition of Philip K. Dick's Cantata 140. Now, I did not know, I'd never heard of that book. It turns out that it was published in America as The Crack in Space. But it's a cool cover, and I started reading it, and it's a fun book. It says, it is the year 2080, and Earth's seemingly insurmountable overpopulation crisis has been alleviated temporarily by placing millions of people into voluntary deep freeze. But in an election year, the pressure is on to find a way which will allow them to resume their lives. It seems an insoluble problem until a flaw in the new instantaneous travel system opens up the possibility of finding new worlds to colonize. Philip K. Dick, he is one of the great science fiction writers. He wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was made into Blade Runner. He's just one, and The Man in the High Castle, one of the great genius works of science fiction. So if you've never read Philip K. Dick, check him out. Also at that same bookstore, I found Some Will Not Die, another very cool book and book cover. I believe the cover's by Leo and Diane Dillon, a husband and wife team of artists who did brilliant work and they were Harlan Ellison's cover artists for many years. And this is by Algis Budrys, who again was one of that group of science fiction writers that all knew each other, all went to conventions. I met him at various points, and it's also very fun because on the back they have a picture of him. And many of these guys, I had no idea what they looked like in their youth, so it's fun to see them, busy at work. And this is sort of a doomsday book. This is, to get his woman a slice of bread, a man will kill. He does it out of love. To feed and protect his children, a man will conquer the world. So, so it's kind of an apocalyptic trope, but very eye-catching and effective cover. And then finally, he sold me these two items. Many of you know that I'm a big fan of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It really changed my life. It was very instrumental in making me who I am. So the bookstore had this book, 2001, Filming the Future, which has all sorts of stuff about 2001: A Space Odyssey, and designs and just tons of cool things, photographs, illustrations, storyboards, and it's quite a rare book. So it was great to get that. And then accompanying it was Moonwatcher's Memory, a diary of 2001: A Space Odyssey, forward by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, this is very cool because the first section of 2001: A Space Odyssey takes place in the past with a group of Australopithecines who are manipulated intellectually by an artifact from an alien race. And the guy who played the lead Australopithecine, which was named Moonwatcher. This was the guy who basically wrangled the ape performers, got them to perform sort of believably, and he played the lead ape. This is his memoir, and it is signed by him. It says, "For Allison, all the years gone, dear, Dan Richter, Moonwatcher." And how often are you going to see that? And interesting enough, this guy was a heroin addict when he was working with Kubrick, and Kubrick found out, and rather than firing him, was very interested in what he had to do to kind of, maintain his habit, and kept him on and worked with him. And he was brilliant, and it was a good working relationship. And this guy didn't let Kubrick down, even though he was on cocaine and heroin throughout the production. So, but this is his, and he writes about it in here, which is fascinating because obviously when the movie came out, none of this was publicly known. So that's it. That's the book haul from the Paperback Collectors Show. And thanks for spending some time with me. If this is the first time you've seen Mr. Sci-Fi, please subscribe, pledge. We put a lot of stuff on Mr. Sci-Fi. We have Patreon. You can buy Space Command shares where you'll get a percentage of my profits when Space Command sells. Many cool things. Tell your friends, spread the word. We're almost 100,000 subscribers. It would be great to hit that number. And we will talk to you again real soon. Bye, guys.